Good morning, everybody. Let's wait a few minutes for more participants to enter the webinar. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Carolina Echenique. I'm manager to the International Division of Mon Group. I'm going to present an overview on legal and tax matters that should be considered when doing business in Peru. The presentation will be held in English and is being recorded right now. Today, we also have Donald Chirinos, tax specialist, attorney at law to the Mon Group Peru office, and Melania Lopez, commercial director to the Mon Group office in Canada, who will be ready at the end of the presentation to solve any query you may have. Please write down any questions on the chat box, and you can use as well the Q&A section. Doing business in Peru, here are some facts of Peru. Its capital is Lima. It's located in South America and has boundaries with Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and Chile. It's the sixth largest economy in Latin America and the 51st largest in the world. Formation of legal entities in Peru. There are some legal aspects to consider. You have to, you require the articles of incorporation that have to be signed by a Peruvian lawyer and must contain, for example, the following information: the company founders, company type, the purpose of the company, the authorized share capital, the bylaws. Once completed, we take it to the notary office where the notary public reviews it and converts it into a public deed. And subsequently, the notary or representative registers your company at the SUNAR, which is the superintendence, National Superintendence of Public Registries. After your company is already registered, the next step is to apply for the taxpayer ID. In Peru, your taxpayer ID is the RUC number, and the RUC number stands for Registro Único de Contribuyentes, which in English will be the Unique Taxpayer Registry. Then the purchase and legalization of the statutory books, accounting books, but in Peru, accounting books are almost all electronic right now. Then labor matters when applicable with the entry of employees on the payroll. If you have an office, a warehouse, commercial premises, it is compulsory to obtain the municipal operating license, which is indefinite if there are no changes to the premises. And the ITSE, which is the Technical Safety Inspection Certificate for buildings, which has to be renewed every 2 years. There are some special procedures depending on the type of your business activities, which must be carried out in the corresponding entity. Mincetur for tourism, DIGESA, health registration for food and beverages, IGEMIT for essential medicines or essential medical devices, Minedo for education, MINEM for energy and mines, the MTC for devices emitting radio frequencies, for example. The trademark registration in the copy, it's also advisable, and the registration in the National Register of Suppliers when you tend to bid for public tenders. Here is a flow on how to set up your company. Once you are certain about the company that suits your business better, you may choose to search and reserve the company name before its incorporation. This is not a mandatory step, but it is strongly recommended since sooner verifies whether there is any coincidence between the company name and others found in the register. If so, your procedure will be observed and you will have to start over. So that is why we recommend that. These are the type of companies in Peru, and the most commonly used is closely held corporation, SAC. Let's go further with this option. The bodies that govern a legal entity are the shareholder meeting, the board of directors, which in case of closely held corporations is optional, then the manager and deputy manager. Given the need of business trips to Peru in order to boost your company's commercial and operational activities, it is recommended to have a board of directors to deduct expenses of the personnel who come to Peru to supervise your operation. For example, tax administration does not allow to deduct any expenses incurred by the shareholders. Closely held corporations must have a minimum of 2 shareholders and a maximum of 20. The share capital is represented by registered shares and is made up of contributions in kind and or cash of the shareholders who are not personally liable for company debts. It is important to know that liability is limited to the capital contribution that each shareholder has made to the company. It cannot be registered in the securities market public registry, and the personal element predominates. Branches of a foreign company, this is another option to consider. Branches that do not have independent legal status from the parent companies, but do have tax status, endowed with legal representation, and it has management autonomy in activities assigned to it by the parent company. It is recommended indeed to register branches in the event of needing to accredit experience when bidding for public tenders, but from a tax point of view, it will not be advisable. For example, in the case of profit distribution, the corresponding tax must be paid whether or not the profit have been remitted. The other corporate types of company require a meeting resolution on the profit to be distributed, and when they have been effectively distributed, then the 5% withholding tax will be applied. Moreover, in terms of income tax, if there is a DTI in force, it would not be applicable for branches. There are some requirements to register a branch. The certificate of good standing of the foreign parent company or certificate of validity, a copy of the memorandum and articles of association or equivalent instruments in the country of origin, and the resolution for the establishment of a branch adopted by the competent corporate body of the foreign parent company, indicating the assigned capital, the appointment of the legal representative, and the powers conferred to this representative. The negative aspect is that income tax must be paid on profits when the annual return is filed, even if they have not been distributed. To take into consideration, the shareholders could be natural or legal person, Peruvian nationals, and or foreign nationals. Share capital, 25% of the share capital must be paid at least when incorporating the company. A minimum amount, bank entity requirements should be met, contribute only money, assets, transfer funds. In relation to the share capital, although it is certain that the general law of companies does not establish a minimum or a maximum for the opening of current accounts, the banking entities require this opening be done with at least $500, which would lead us to a minimum share capital of $2,000. Contributions, for example, in assets are assumed to have been valued, and eventually the tax administration may require such evidence. For transfer of funds, it is important to mention here that loans between related companies should be avoided as much as possible, given the fact that these operations should be made at market value, considering an interest on this transaction. Since the market value is not free of charge, they are subject to interest, which oscillates between 4% or to 5%. Since this payment generates interest, generates Peruvian income as well, and a 30% rate must be withheld from related companies and 4.99% from non-related company. For that reason, we strongly recommend projecting a cash flow of at least 6 months to be considered in the estimation of your capital to avoid continuous cash remittances. Legal representative. The general law of companies does not make any difference between Peruvian nationals or foreign nationals, but the tax administration requires a foreign national to have a valid migratory status. That is, to have obtained the Peruvian foreigner's identity card. Let's go through tax matters. Peruvian taxation system. Taxes on activities carried out by Peruvian legal entities in Peru. There are 2 types of taxes that are levied when setting up an operation in Peru. This is the income tax, for example, on income obtained from business activities carried out in national territory, and the income tax on the dividends distributed by a Peruvian company to its shareholders, and the value added tax. This tax is levied on almost everything, with a few exceptions. It is important to mention on income tax that income tax on dividends, indeed, that the 5% rate is only withheld when the shareholder is a natural person. If the shareholder is a Peruvian company, no income tax is withheld. In this case, the income tax is payable by domiciled or non-domiciled individuals or non-domiciled legal entities. Value added tax. The rate is 18%. It levies all the cases detailed here: the sale of movable property in the country, the provision of use of services, construction contract, first sale of real estate by the builder, import of goods. This tax generates a tax rate, VAT on purchases, the input VAT, minus VAT on sales, the output VAT, which is accumulated and used according to the needs of your operation. It does not expire, and there is no possibility of requesting a refund, with the exception of the case of exports. This tax has to be paid on a monthly frequency. Exceptions are expressly stated in the law. There are special regimes for the advance payment of VAT that should be mentioned, such as the tax obligatory payment system, the spot system, which is applicable to the sale of certain goods and the rendering of services, subject to Peruvian VAT. The main purpose of the spot regime is to generate funds to enable the payment of tax obligations for the taxpayer. The purchaser or service recipient must withhold a percentage of the transaction price and deposit such amount within the seller service provider state bank account. This occurs when paying an invoice at the rate of 10% for the provision of services. There are other rates, but for very specific cases. Any type of tax can be paid with the balances in this account. In this case, it is possible to request a refund if the balances have not been used within a 3-month period. Let's go through another regime related to VAT, is the VAT perception, which is applicable to definite importation of goods subject to VAT. When importing, the regulation establishes that not only VAT and the tariff must be paid, but also a 3.5% rate on the FOB value must be paid. But it is important to mention that in the first importation, the applicable rate is a 10% rate. So it is recommended that this first import to be small. And this tax is also used for the payment of any taxes. Next slide. Let's go through corporate income tax. The general framework levies all company income should be considered the accrual basis, and the rate is 29.5%. A refund in this case can be requested for the excess or applied against future payments. The applicable rate for monthly returns is 1.5% on gross revenue in the first year. Then a coefficient is applied, which is determined by a established formula on which the calculation for the determination on the tax will be made. Regarding dividends, the withholding will have to be applied at the time of the agreement or payment, whichever comes first. And for branches, it's payable when the annual return is filed. Taxpayer domicile with their worldwide income and non-domicile only Peruvian source income. The taxable year starts on the 1st of January and ends on the 31st of December. And the filing of the annual tax return is between the end of March and the beginning of April. Those are the categories of corporate income tax. It is noteworthy that the payment of income tax is made on the basis of monthly filings together with the VAT filing. Then comes the annual filing for which the taxpayer will have to check backwards if the payment on account cover the calculation of the total income tax. In the case it does not, the difference may be refunded. And if an overpayment was made during the year, a refund can be requested, or alternatively, it can be applied against future payments. SME tax regime. This is applicable to taxpayer whose net income does not exceed 1,700 UITs in the taxable year. But unfortunately, this regime cannot be used much at the level of international companies, since the limit indicates that It considers indeed the income of the whole business group, directly or indirectly related entities. And this linkage is not only for at national level, but at the international level as well. These 1,700 UITs are approx $2,300,000. These are the assumptions for the relationship. The tax rate applicable. There is a cumulative progressive scale to be applied on annual net income. For this system, small and medium companies can pay a progressive tax rate of 10% of their annual income tax for the first 15 UITs, which is approximately $20,370, and the tax rate of 29.50% for the excess. Regulation for the use of Peruvian banking system for tax purposes. The amount above which means of payment shall be used is $500 or 2,000 soles. The means of payments allowed are deposit into account, money orders, transfer of funds, payment order, etc. When banking formal obligations are considered to have been achieved, if the payment is made directly to the creditor, supplier of the good or service provider. Now, when it is important to note that when payments have to be made to third parties, SUNAT, the tax administration, has to be notified prior to that payment. What happens if no means of payment are used? You shall not be entitled to deduct expenses, costs, or credits. Transactions with non-domiciled persons. Regarding VIT, let's go through the use of services within the country. A service is used in the country when it is provided by non-domiciled subject and is consumed or used within the national territory. There are some features to be considered. The person providing the service is a non-domiciled person. The user or client of the service is a domiciled person, and the service is used or consumed in Peruvian territory. If this service contracted have been used or consumed within national territory, the Peruvian company must pay the VAT with the 18% rate, and the amount paid can then be deducted. Operations with non-domiciled person have certain tax implications, both in terms of income tax and VAT. With respect to contracting of services, when Peruvian client hires a foreign company, at the time of payment, the client will be obliged to pay that VAT on the service contracted, provided that the service has been consumed or used within a national territory. In this case, it is not a withholding tax, but the taxpayer has to pay this with their own money, their own funds. The obliged subject, individuals using services provided by non-domiciled person in the country, and has to be consumed or used within the national territory, which is the place where the immediate use or the first act of the disposal of the service is made. The effect of VAT payment for the user, let's go something that I have missed. It is irrelevant whether the service has been provided partly in the country or partly abroad or entirely outside the country. The effects of VAT payment for the user of the service for domicile. The payment of VAT by the user of the service entitles him to use such payment and as a tax credit against the VAT on his sales, the rate usual, and the effects of the VAT payment for the provider of the service, the non-domicile. is a neutral effect for the service provided. This is not a withholding tax. Corporate income tax. When a service is contracted to a non-domiciled person, an obligation to pay the corresponding tax in Peru will arise. There is a connection between the service paid and the Peruvian territory. For example, for premises or goods located within national territory. If royalties are paid by a subject domiciled within the country, loan for businesses located within the territory or taxpayer domiciled in the country. That is, as general rule, service provided within a Peruvian territory, with the exceptions of digital services and technical assistance. In this slide, it is shown the withholding tax on foreign invoices, and we will go further with digital service and technical assistance. Technical assistance considers a withholding rate of 15%. In case of technical assistance, it essentially refers to the transfer of knowledge. This is the independent service whereby the provider undertakes to use his or her skills through the application of certain procedures, arts, or techniques in order to provide a specialized, non-patentable knowledge necessary in the production process, for example. This comprises engineering services, research and project development, financial advisory, and consultancy. There are some exceptions as well. Then the digital service. In this case, the withholding tax is 30%, a service that is made available to the user via the internet or platforms or any other network through online access, and is characterized by being essentially automatic and not feasible in the absence of information technology, and is used economically in the country. In this case, even though the service provider is in another country and this service provider is not physically present in the country and the service is offered to me online, the payment for the service is considered to be a Peruvian source income and must be taxed at the rate of 30%. It includes, among others, software maintenance, technical support, data warehousing, etc. To take into account, if both services are provided at the same time, it must be differentiated in the invoice in order to apply the corresponding income tax rate. If it is not possible to discriminate, the essential and predominant part of the transaction is treated accordingly. Double taxation agreements, DTAs. Peru has 8 DTAs in force right now with Mexico, Canada, Chile, South Korea, Switzerland, Japan, Brazil, and Portugal. In this slide, you can see the comparative Peruvian legislation with the DTA and the rates applicable. Regarding DTAs, it has been established that each resident will pay his tax in this country of residence as a general rule, for instance. Regarding tax credit, persons resident in Canada, for example, this country has a DTA in force, who obtain income from Peruvian sources and are subject to taxation in Peru, may deduct against Canadian taxes corresponding to such income the taxes paid in Peru in accordance with the applicable provisions of the Canadian law. Case studies. Services provided by a foreign company to a Peruvian company. In this first case, the supplier is a country without a DTA in force, which provides services to a Peruvian client. For example, this is a USA LLC, provided services to a Peruvian company, and this company pays with withholding the service provided and the Peruvian company pays the VAT of 18%, the USA LLC sends an invoice for $10,000, but receives $7,000 or $8,500 due to the withholding taxes. And the service provided is within the Peruvian territory, and this company sent staff to Peru. The next case is a supplier with it's a country with a DTA in force that provides services to a Peruvian client, for example, a Canada Corp, which fees is $10,000 to this Peruvian company. This Canada Corp send the invoice plus the certificate of residence, pays $10,000, and the Peruvian company pays the $10,000 without withholding. But if this Canada Corp send the invoice but no residence certificate, the Peruvian company pays $7,000 and withholds $3,000. The Peruvian company pays VAT for 18% rate. In this case, the Canada Corp, in the case of the withholding, the Canada Corp can request a refund from SUNAT. And this service is provided as well within Peruvian territory. To take into consideration, it is important to enter into contracts, obtain the certificate of residence to avoid withholdings. In the case of DTAs in force, the proof of provision of services, keeping track of displaced workers, the expats. Let's go through this in a few minutes. Obtain retention certificates. I'm sorry about that. Regarding the keeping the track of displaced workers, if the foreign company spends more than 183 days in Peruvian territory through its personnel, a permanent establishment can be set up, and such it must pay income tax and VAT in Peru. In the case of DTA, it is no longer applicable and will be treated as a Peruvian taxpayer. So let's be careful with that. And this is an example of an invoice with the corresponding certificate of residence in case of countries with DTA in force. And we have finished. Thank you for your patience and your attention. I appreciate that you join us. Donald and Melania, please, I give you the floor. Let's wait for a few minutes to participants to write down any questions in the chat box or through the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you so much for all the informative information that you share with us today. Just quick reminder that they can, the people who is joining the webinar, they can enter the questions to the Q&A section, and we are going to answer those questions. Or also you have the email address of Elizabeth Moya, who is the person in charge of the Peruvian office in Mont Group in Peru. So you can also take a screenshot and send an email to her with your questions. And we are going to send you also a follow-up email. In case you have any question or comment, you can reply to that email as well. So I think we have someone who raised the hand. Is Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Is Rodolfo. Let me give you the microphone if you want to talk. Give me 1 second. Okay, you can unmute your microphone and ask your questions, Rodolfo. We can hear you. You can also type your question in the chat or in the Q&A section. I think we are having, I don't hear anything. Do you, Carolina?
No, I think there are no questions by now.
Yeah.
But of course, we are at their disposal to answer any question that may be that will arise later using the email of Elizabeth. We will be glad to answer any question they may have.
Yes. Yes, we will do that. So as I mentioned, you are
La
going
pregunta
to...
está, perdón, la pregunta está en preguntas y respuestas.
The Q&A section.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Donald, es about de residencia para las implicaciones impositivas, porque se mostró en la presentación, me imagino, la compañía que está vendiendo a Perú.
¿Pero qué significa cuando dice you show the CDN company selling?
Canadian Company, la
Canadian.
compañía
¿qué
canadiense.
¿qué pasa si una empresa canadiense vende al Perú?
Sí.
En términos sencillos.
Dice, tengo una pregunta acerca de la residencia por implicaciones tributarias.
Si la empresa canadiense vende solo bienes a Perú, no hay ningún problema respecto de la doble tributación.
If the Canadian company sells items or goods to Peru, there is no implications for that for tax matters.
Solo sería aplicable el convenio siempre que la empresa preste servicios a Perú. La empresa canadiense preste servicios a Perú.
It's only applicable when the company sells services to Peru.
Y haya enviado personal a Perú.
And if they have a payroll or people working in Peru from Canada going to Peru.
Y ese personal pase más de 183 días en territorio nacional, en territorio peruano, en un periodo de 12 meses.
And if the people working for the Canadian company are working in Peru for more than 183 days or within 12 months.
En ese supuesto, si exceden los 183 días de permanencia en Perú, entonces se configura un establecimiento permanente.
If that happens, if the people who are working for the Canadian company are in Peru more than 183 days, they have to have a residency in Peru.
Y por tanto, ese establecimiento permanente debería tributar en Perú como una empresa peruana.
And that's why they have to pay taxes as a Peruvian company.
Y ahí ya tributa IGB o VAT, que le dicen ustedes, o el impuesto a la renta o withholding tax.
And in that case, they pay the taxes, the VAT or EGB, as we mentioned in the presentation. Y idealmente, si tú provees muchos servicios en Perú, desde la perspectiva de los impuestos es más atractiva establecer una residencia peruana?
Lo que hace el convenio es justamente tratar de facilitar las operaciones entre empresas canadienses y empresas peruanas.
What makes the agreement is to facilitate the work between the Canadian and Peruvian companies. So that's the purpose of the agreement.
Pero yo diría que más es lo comercial, es un aspecto comercial el que obliga a muchas empresas canadienses a abrir en Perú por una demanda de su cliente peruano.
It's more the commercial side of the company, the Canadian company, that they ask the Canadian companies to open operations in Peru, as a Peruvian company.
Porque a la empresa peruana se le complica a veces cumplir con unos trámites adicionales a nivel tributario que tiene que hacer cuando recibe facturas del exterior.
Because there is some issues in the invoice, the paperwork, when the Peruvian company receives invoices from a foreign company, in this case, Canadian company. So that's why it's easier for them to establish the company in Peru.
Y en ese caso es que los clientes peruanos le piden a las empresas del exterior, mejor abre una empresa en Perú y mándame una factura peruana.
That's why the clients, the Peruvian clients, ask the company to provide a Peruvian invoice because it facilitates the business between them.
Eso es
Dice,
todo.
gracias, la información estaba bien.
Sí, lo leí. Ok. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Hay una.
Yeah, we do have, sí, tenemos una pregunta que es de Alejandro Chávez y que está en español. Yeah, for the rest of the people who speak in English, we have a question in Spanish from Alejandro Chávez.
Te lo leo. Dice, por las ventas de una compañía canadiense por equipos a un proyecto peruano, la compañía local, o sea, la peruana, entiendo, necesita facturar por los servicios de facilitación en la venta, entre paréntesis, comisión. ¿Qué tipo de documentos se debe emitir? Se debe incluir IGB. La empresa peruana debe emitir una factura y sí debe incluir IGB.
Okay. Okay, I think we don't have any other question. So feel free to reach us. You are going to receive a follow-up email after we end this webinar. So you can send us your questions or comments through that email.
Yes, of
Carolina?
course. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and have a good week ahead. Thank you, Melania. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you.
Thank you.